Welcome to the Care2Listen podcast. Today I am joined by Jenna Schonke. Jenna is a registered psychiatric nurse and a board member of the CMHA BC. In this episode, Jenna dives into her personal journey navigating mental health and the healthcare system. She shares her personal healing journey and aspirations for the profession going forward. Today's episode is being broadcasted to you on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Trigger warning. This episode includes discussions that may be sensitive to some listeners, including self-harm and addiction. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Care2Listen podcast. I'm your host, Sean Burke, and today joining me is Jenna Schonke. Welcome to the show, Jenna.
Thank you for having me.
So Jenna, registered psychiatric nurse, clinical practice lead, working in an acute psychiatric unit in hospital, and also a board member on this for the CMHA BC. Got a lot going on.
Yeah, I do have a lot going on, but I like it. It keeps me busy, and it keeps me kind of moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking the time today. We'd love the first question we always ask our guests is to tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? Who are you?
Yeah, so I always find this question interesting because really who I am is a mother and a nurse. Outside of that, I'm really just family focused. I had my daughter very young, so I do have a 12-year-old going on 13-year-old, so that's keeping me very busy right now. And yeah, I work a lot, and I just finished my degree in psychiatric nursing. I had only had my diploma up until last week.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting. And, jumping into it a little bit, everybody has a story. When it comes to your career, your progression through the profession, what does that story look like for you? Where does it start?
It started when I was really young. I've always wanted to help people. I guess my own mental health issues started when I was a little girl as well. My dad's side has a long line of addiction, where my mom's side, my grandparents came over from Germany after the war, so there's that own kind of trauma mixed in there. So I deal with my own mental health issues, but even then, I've always just wanted to help other people who are struggling. So after having my daughter at a very young age, my grandparents sat me down one day and said, Jay, we got to help you before we can't help you. And so I actually reached out on Facebook and just asked the Facebook world, does anyone know about any jobs in mental health? But obviously I had to focus on ones that'll be a career, and put a roof over my head for my daughter and I. And one of my friends, she commented and said, you can become a psychiatric nurse. And at this time, I had no idea that was even a thing. You only hear about RNs and LPNs, and all of a sudden there's this thing called an RPN. So she showed me the program, which is through Stenberg College, which actually allowed me to do almost all of my theory online. And then my practicums in person. It kept me central in Prince George, so I was able to be home with my daughter and work around her schedule. So I started that when she went into kindergarten, just because it was the perfect time. She wasn't at home all day. And then during that time, though, I was managing a restaurant, and it was a sister. They had a sister pub as well with a banquet room. So I was managing a restaurant, a banquet room, being a mom to a 5-year-old, and going through nursing school.
Wow. So consistent theme here I'm seeing in terms of staying busy. Well, I think that's something, obviously, jumping into the line of work that you're doing and supporting, your clients. How has your lived experience helped you in the work that you're doing today?
Tremendously. I think I can relate to my patients a lot more. It is interesting in nursing. They say, don't share too much about your life. But I think in the field that I work in, we have to in order to connect with the people. So my own mental health struggles, I struggled with anxiety, depression. I did have a history of self-harming. And I did struggle with alcohol use up until probably a year ago. I bring all of that and I share it all with my patients just to say, you're not alone. I do actually understand how you're feeling, and here's what's helped me, here's what's helped others, and kind of just getting them on their own journey.
And being in the profession, how do you manage and walk that fine line of sharing too much versus sharing enough so that you can build that rapport?
I think it's really trying to figure out what the message is that you're trying to send. So especially like I really connect with obviously women. That being said, also while I was going through nursing school, and prior to that, I was in a very, very toxic relationship. It was very abusive in many ways. And so I think taking that into it, like I can connect with women in that way. I don't have to share the details, but I can say like I know what you've been through. I've been through something similar, and especially when it comes to being a young mom. It's extremely difficult to be a young mom for anybody, and never mind in how society is now. But just giving women that power that moms struggle. We all struggle, and we're all trying our best, but everything will be okay.
It will, and sometimes it takes some time to get to that stage, and
Yeah.
to have the wherewithal to continue to go through it and to put in the work. I want to jump back to something that you've been talking about, which is a lot of things that are happening in this concept of having home life, work life, and the reality is that it's just one life, and you happen to be at work and you happen to be at home at sometimes, but often we try to separate the two. What for somebody who sort of brings that mentality of, I'm going to separate, I'm going to keep my home stuff at home and work at home, what sort of thoughts do you have around that?
It's very difficult. We try our best to have the home life and the work life, but you're right, it all comes into one. There's days that I deal with crises at work and helping people through their crisis all day, and I think I'm going to go home and I'm just going to make dinner and watch TV, and I get home and my daughter's having a crisis because some kind of bullying or something happened at school, and so then you almost have to pop back into that. I try not to do the nursing role at home, but I've learned so many skills in nursing that help my daughter with her mental health. So it has to be a quick transition, I think, but it is exhausting because there are days that you just so badly want to rest, but it feels like you can't.
And is that like a consistent theme, that you've heard across other colleagues, where sometimes there are those challenges in terms of separating the two, or is that, I'm just curious to jump into that.
I'd say it's a little bit of both. We're all different in nursing. I think some people come in with, I have a lot of compassion. Sometimes I think I have too much compassion because it does lead to burnout. I think it goes both ways. Some people are fantastic at, I've walked off the grounds, I'm done. Where I have a very hard time with that. It's something that I'm actually trying to work on. I think it's both ways. Sorry.
And someone like yourself who is a high achiever, who has a lot going on and pushes themselves to a very high standard, burnout might look different for you than it might for someone else. But what are some of those things like that you've experienced when you have had burnout? Like what came up and showed up for you?
So the first thing that I start to notice is I get very irritable and very easily angered. Little things I won't be able to react as calmly and as precisely as I normally would, and I almost start to just not care. So I actually recently, I had to take 3 weeks off of work. At that time I was working in the ER as a crisis nurse. And just the compassionate fatigue burnout, it got me. And I was driving to work one day, and I made my partner pull over and let me out to walk. Because I was just so angry. I was like, I don't want to be in here with you. I just need to walk to clear my head before I walk in the building. And then I walked in the building and I just broke down crying. So then I walked upstairs and I was like, I can't be here right now. So usually it's irritability and just a loss of I feel like I'm losing control almost.
Well, in hearing that, the challenges of trying to show up for others when, most importantly, you need to show up for yourself. Yet that's a consistent theme that we hear across healthcare professionals. Why do you think that is?
I think as nurses, we all stepped in the field because we want to help and we're all caring. And I think we don't stop caring. It's very hard to stop caring. it's what we went into the field for. So I don't think, and especially now these days, like we work 12 to 18-hour days just because of staffing shortages, and we're all trying to do our best. And I think that's just it. We're all just trying to do our best to make a difference in the world.
And what do you think needs to change to be more supportive to enable people to show up as their best selves?
I think we all need to learn to give ourselves compassion, and that it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to take a step back from healthcare and let the other people take the reins while we work on ourselves or let ourselves settle.
And where did you learn some of these techniques? Like I know, when you're going through some of the burnout, and previously we had a chance to chat about this, you were able to find counseling. But what are some of the benefits of counseling, and how did that sort of help you go through and deal with some of the burnout?
Counseling has been a lifesaver for me. I reached out to find a counselor after I left my toxic relationship, and the whole purpose I reached out was because I was like, I just want to make sure that I didn't screw up my daughter. But in that the only way to help my daughter was to help myself first. So the thing about counseling is it's a very safe, neutral place. And as with any kind of public health sector, we're not allowed to go home and talk to our families about the things that we see and hear. Like we can only give so much information, where my counselor, it actually turns out she works with a lot of nurses. And so she understands kind of what we're going through and how to help us just get those thoughts out, because we don't have that opportunity. And then I guess it just in my work alone through the last 5 years in learning tips on how to help my patients, I've learned so much about how to help myself.
There you go. Well, I mean, that makes so much sense. Like if you're going to be talking about it all day, and you can start, what do they say? Eat your own dog food or something.
Yeah. I'm a really big believer. And if I'm going to preach it and I'm going to teach it, well, I better know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Well, and what are some of those healthy coping strategies that, have worked for you outside of the counseling?
Yeah, so I'd say in the last probably 2 years is I've really been on an upward slope. I don't know if that's the right term for it. But I've fallen in love with working out. And 2.5 years ago, if you asked me to work out, I would have laughed and been like, no, I'm not coming. Now I have my own gym in my home. Like I have a treadmill, I have a weight set.
Nice.
So I started with yoga, but it was a little too slow for me. I like to stretch when my muscles hurt, but that's about it. And then I just one day, one of my friends on Instagram had started like her own coaching thing. And I was like, I'm just going to sign up and see how much I can do. So I got into weights and then I got into running. And I'm really into the cold plunges right now.
Okay. So we got the physical outlet and then the Wim Hof mentality, doing the cold plunge. What about the mental side?
So the mental side for me, I'm very introverted, which is surprising because I work in a field where I have to talk to people all day, but I enjoy talking to people and solving problems with them and trying to help them through life. But I've learned that like my social battery, once it's depleted, for me to have to recharge it is really getting outside in nature without my cell phone. I hate cell phones now. I realize how distracting they are to us to being able to be center in the world. So yeah, a lot of outdoors. And to really, really recharge my battery, I have to actually leave Prince George. Because then like my family it's not that they can't get a hold of me, but it's almost like nobody needs me. So I can just sit back and like, whew, I'm good.
Where do you go?
So my family, thankfully, has a house just on Cow Lake, so not too far from Prince George.
Maybe you don't want to share this so that your friends and family don't know where you're going and get a hold of you. But.
Yeah. I just I can't show up. That's the nice thing is I can't show up. I don't know if that sounds wrong, but so yeah, we've got the house in Cow Lake. I can always disappear there if I need to. Prior to the pandemic, we were big travelers. Mexico was our main destination. It's close enough to get away and get some sun. I had the opportunity to go to Greece in June.
Nice.
So that was the best. I mean, I don't know when I'll do that again, but that was a good recharge.
Well, and it sounds like, again, just, prioritizing yourself, taking care of your own needs, and putting yourself ahead of others.
Yeah.
Doing all of this work, hearing, going from working with your patients and then all of a sudden going home and supporting, your child, why did you want to join the CMHA-BC on the board and add one more thing to your plate?
So my Opa was a very big achiever in life. He had a part in starting UNBC in Prince George, as well as one of the pulp mills. And so I think I get my drive from him. But within 6 months of nursing, I was kind of sitting back and thinking, like, this isn't enough. Like, I'm not doing enough was essentially how I was feeling. And then the nomination, or the ad showed up on my feed, and I was like, I'm just gonna go for it. I hadn't even been nursing for that long, and I was like, I'm just gonna go for it and see what happens. And then the next thing you know, 6 months later, I'm sitting on the board of directors for CMHA-BC.
Well, pretty big role and importance in terms of supporting, the province and being an advocate for mental health. What do you see within this role as being the biggest or most important issue that the organization can focus on?
Oh, that's a big question. Access is the biggest issue that I think everybody should be focused on, but not just building more resources. It's all about the process too. Accessing treatment is the longest referral ever. They're probably 30 pages. So if I find it hard, then a patient who's using substances must find it extremely hard to fill out. So I think making more access and making it more easy to get into. I don't know how to word that properly.
No, I think we all, I understand in terms of reducing barriers,
Yeah.
making it easy, supporting people in ways that meet them where they're at. Like, why do you think it has gotten to a place where, just use the example that you said, 30 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it get to this point where there is so much complexity and confusion within the system?
I wish I had the answer, but what I see from my practice is everything is so virtual and over the phone now. I think if an intake worker had the ability to sit down with someone who is interested in treatment and have a conversation such as we're having now, you can gather so much more information than someone trying to fill out a 30-page referral and try to make themselves look good enough to be accepted into the program. And I think that human connection piece has really been lost in the last couple of years, and that's what people need to be well.
And is it as simple as, not... I think this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but when it comes to trying to improve access or reduce friction, oftentimes those are positive steps towards people getting the support they need. But one of the biggest challenges is the availability of those treatment spots or detox spots. What, from like a policy and administrative perspective, is the board at CMHA doing to try to be an advocate for more?
Oh, they're doing a lot. The CMHA BC, I think, has made incredible progress over the last couple of years. I've even been on the board. I mean, they got over 100 more treatment beds available, and I think they're low cost to no cost, which is a huge issue for accessing treatment. They're huge advocates for youth mental health, which is super important. I mean, they're doing so much right now. I can't even think about what they're doing.
Well, and even this podcast, right? I mean, it's definitely supported through CMHA BC and Safe Care BC, and all the different workplace programs that are available, and just the continued, important role that they have within the system and supporting. And part of that question, I think, really comes at this from, a curiosity and an understanding of, what's the next sort of focus point within the organization, and I know, again, you're sitting at a board level, maybe not in the operational level, but from your perspective, where do you see the greatest opportunity to continue to provide those supports?
I think CMHA BC right now has the loudest and biggest voice about mental health care. I don't think that it's being assessed and evaluated as much in other departments. And I think because CMHA is so focused on mental health care, that just their advocacy for defining what is mental health care is kind of the direction that they're going. What is needed and why is it needed, and being able to say that, where I don't feel like in the other world it's not being talked about very much.
Well, and no doubt it's such an important role that they do play in terms of that advocacy and delivering on some of those services. So yeah, really grateful to be a part of that. When we jump back into some of the challenges on the healthcare fields, what are some of those biggest challenges that you've personally faced within the healthcare field and getting those supports from a mental health and wellness perspective?
Yeah, so since I'm in hospital, I don't have a lot of connection with the community teams, and I think that's where things are getting a little disjointed in healthcare, is that there's not a collaborative effort amongst everybody, even like not health authority programs. I mean, there's all the nonprofit programs everywhere, and I just don't feel like everyone's sitting down to have and again, I'm so big about in-person conversations. The emailing back and forth, I don't think that's effective. I think there needs to be a roundtable discussion with many stakeholders about where are we going with this, and how are we going to improve patients' outcome.
When we think about healthcare and we think about physical safety, psychological safety, the two can go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing your work and showing up for your patients in the best way, have you been able to kind of give it some thought into how you might do that, or what you might need to do to be able to do a really effective job?
So for me, on an individual level, every day, I really have to just tell myself, like, it is what it is, and you're only going to do the best that you can in the environment that you're provided with. Um, yeah, so that's for me, is just showing up the best of my ability with what I've got in front of me. And I am super transparent with my patients about that, because they always express their frustrations, and I'll be the one to say, I agree with you, but this is how it is. And so yeah, we're all just trying to do our best in a system that's just overcrowded and understaffed.
Well, and you've taken on a little bit of a leadership role in terms of your team lead, and rather than necessarily focusing specifically on the patient, what does that advocacy for nurses, like, how and what have you been able to sort of really bring to the forefront in terms of that advocacy work?
So my direction in my new leadership position is very much focused around nurses' therapeutic rapport with their patients. I think because we're all so stressed on a day-to-day basis, we really lose that therapeutic, compassionate, even tone, the body language, and trying to bring that into mental health nursing, because the people that we work with, they can read every movement, every eye movement, every tone. And so my first step in this new role is to really bring the compassion and the care back to nursing, and figure out how nurses are going to be less stressed and be better able to support our patients.
And where do you start with that? Like, is that something that, again, is before the nurse shows up to work, like dealing with some of the challenges that they might be experiencing? Or is it, in the actual hospitals where, they're dealing with different issues that might be difficult, or they're facing those competitive demands of operational efficiency, but still trying to provide that empathy and that time with the patient? Like, where do you start? It feels like such a big, overwhelming challenge.
So I think it starts both outside when you leave your home and you're coming into work, but also in the hospital. So I mean, I trying to figure out how to teach other people to ground at home before you come in. Just even those deep breaths and just those affirmations that today is going to be okay, even though it might not be. But just so grounding affirmations before you come in. But once it comes to being in the hospital, I'm a really big supporter of a technique called motivational interviewing. It was originally created to help people who have substance use problems, not created, but kind of developed. Um, and it's a conversation style that moves a conversation forward without giving advice, which in nursing, we are very much taught to give advice, get to the end, and then that's it. But in mental health, people don't really want a ton of advice. And even if you do give advice, it's not that effective as them trying to bring out their own goals and their own needs. Motivational interviewing has kind of taken off in the world. It's all over, even in Europe and stuff. I use it with my daughter. I use it with my partner, just because we're not here to problem solve. We're here to try and help people work through their problems, and that's my first step is getting everyone on this. It's really about it's like compassion, empathy, understanding. And it's a very cool technique. It's very confusing at first, but once you get going with it, it works wonders to help people.
Well, it certainly sounds like something I got to do a little more research on.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is that on the one hand, simply saying if we could show up for everybody and give them as much time as they needed, well, again, you have those operational efficiency demands and getting to the next patient and going through your entire day. But at the same time, providing that level of care and attention is really what's needed. So I like how there's a little bit of a balance there between the both. I want to jump back a little bit again to some of the challenges that you've faced as a healthcare provider. And I know that it feels like we've passed COVID-19. And oftentimes we hear the criticism of, can we stop talking about it? Can we just move on? But yet I've heard so much when it comes to the need to have processed what happened, the need to, resolve that unresolved trauma. And I'm curious from your perspective to hear, where you fall in terms of how COVID impacted you within your profession.
So I actually entered nursing 6 months before the pandemic hit. So the COVID was my nursing. I don't actually know what it was like before. It impacted me tremendously. And like I said in the beginning, like I was such I'm a hard worker. I still am a hard worker, but I would work tons of hours. I would give my all. I was like that even prior to going into nursing. But when the pandemic hit, my mom is my main caregiver for my OPA, and also when I'm at work, she cares for my daughter. So when the numbers started to rise, I actually decided in December, the very first Christmas, that I wasn't going to spend Christmas with my family. Because in the role that I was in, there was only 3 of us, and the other 2 had decided to go on leave just because of the dangers of and the risks of working in the hospital and having families. And so my mom took my daughter for probably, I think, about a week and a half over Christmas because there was nobody to work. And I was like, well, if I'm not here, who's going to be here to help these people? Because I felt that there was not a lot of attention paid to the population that I work with during COVID. And so I think I gave a lot of myself then. But I also think at the same time, it took a lot of me. Working in this field, they don't warn you how many people you're going to lose. Gabor Mate, he was the one, I was watching one of his podcasts or something, and he said, like, in this field, if someone was to ask me how many lives I've saved, I would fail at my job. And that's because we are losing a lot of our patients. And I think throughout COVID and trying to help these people, it took a lot out of us. And I don't feel that the effects of COVID on people and their mental health has been addressed. There's been a lot of financial heartache. I see a lot of people who have lost their jobs. I think that's why I hit burnout so quickly into my career, actually, because of the effects of COVID.
And do you feel like we are still at a place where we need to continue to process and, deal with those unresolved traumas, or are we now at a place where we can start moving forward, or do the two go hand in hand?
I'm a big believer that the two go hand in hand. I think that healing comes with processing. And the thing with trauma is just because it was only a couple of years ago doesn't mean that the effects of it aren't going to show up in 10 years. That's the very interesting thing about trauma is all of a sudden you feel good and then it just hits you. Where, yeah, I don't, I think it's a process that's going to be ongoing for a while. And I think that it should be because people's lives were affected in such massive ways.
Are there any gaps that, maybe we need to focus on right now to help people, or is it a unique sort of process that individuals need to go through, or is there systemic opportunity for change or learning here?
I think it's unique only because everyone is affected in their own unique ways. Just because we all went through the same thing doesn't mean that it affected us all the same. But I do think that people need to talk about it more as a society, even as a town. Like, how did this affect Prince George itself as opposed to northern BC? Because we are all very different in our populations.
Absolutely. And those needs, it's going to change, but providing a system that supports, the individual care plans and whatnot, I think are, again, getting down to that granular level of detail to help people move forward. I want to jump into a little bit about, being that advocacy role again. What are some of the benefits of the work that you do and why you do what you do?
I just want the world to be a better place. I'm just so like hippie old school in that. I'm not a fan of the busy lifestyle, even though I demonstrate that. I think that society's gone off in that we're always busy, we've always got something to do, and we like family used to be family is so important to our mental health, and not just family, but any kind of connection. And I think that because we're all busy, we're all virtual, we're not getting that human connection anymore that's needed. And so that's my biggest thing that I advocate is we need more human connection. And I think like that's my end goal. And that's just what I hope will happen one day.
Well, and it sounds like, that purpose that you have, that passion to get into the line of work that you did, so much of it sounded like it stemmed from your history and your life experiences. I do want to take us back to the beginning of the conversation where you mentioned that you had a history of self-harm. And I'm curious to know a little bit around the progress and the work that you did to be able to move through that and to get into the place that you're at today.
It's been a long process. So I was self-harming in high school. At the same time, I was dabbling in hallucinogenics. My dad had moved away when I was 10 or 11, and that was a huge hit for me. My dad was my best friend. And then my mom married someone who was not a good person, and I was in the home with her. My dad always said, you can come here, but I never had courage isn't the right word, but I never wanted to leave my mom because I wanted to make sure she was safe. And so in that and being around that is what kind of led to my self-harm, because when you're a young child and you want your mom to be safe, there's really no way that you can do that. And I think the self-harm, it took away the pain for me that I was experiencing deep down. And so eventually I moved out at 14. Because I couldn't live in that house anymore. And so my self-harm did stop then because I found a moment of peace. That being said, as I progressed into the other struggles in my life, being a mom at 17 was very hard. When I started having an issue with drinking, I would usually drink and then become very depressed and then self-harm. And so that's when when I left my relationship, I started to connect the dots. About what is self-harm even doing for me, and that was what I had to figure out in order to stop. And so with that, but when we stop one thing, our body and mind kind of look for something else that's comforting. And so the alcohol use increased, the self-harming stopped, and it was kind of just this cycle of like I'm never feeling safe and I'm never feeling okay. And so I really, and I was in a horrible relationship for 7 years. So the whole process has just been finding out what makes me feel safe, and what makes me be able to be my authentic self. And it's been a process.
Yeah. It's certainly a journey, and again, seeing how far you've come,
Yeah.
you should feel very proud about that. What were some of those moments of clarity for you that helped take you from, move on from that toxic relationship or connect those dots? How did you go through that?
I think honestly, being in psychiatric nursing school gave me a lot of insight into what was going on in my life. Even though my friends and my family and my mom and everyone was like, this isn't healthy. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Just leave me alone. I don't like to listen to people. I'm not very good at it. But it was definitely the psychology and learning the psychology that I was like, oh, this is not healthy. And it kind of gave me the courage then to leave. But leaving a toxic relationship also comes back down to safety. When you're constantly being told that nobody's going to love you because you are 20 years old with a baby, it really takes that autonomy and that self-confidence away from you. And so eventually things just kind of fell into place where I was able to leave. And once I left and I had about a month on my own, I was like, oh, I'm okay. Like, I am safe. But when you're leaving, the idea of safety is so scary. So yeah, it for me, it's been trying to find the safety, and I really don't even think like I've become my authentic self until probably the last year. It's been a journey, trying to figure out like, who is Jenna? So
such a deep, profound question right there.
Yeah.
And trying to come back into like that awareness stage where you started to develop that education for yourself. If you look now to where you are compared to when you were that 14, 15-year-old girl, what would you be telling that 14 or 15-year-old girl?
Everything will be okay. Very simple, because in the moment it feels like nothing is ever okay and this life it's not worth it. But I tell all my patients this in their 20s, because I'm just turning 30 in next 2 months, and I'm very excited to turn 30. Like, I feel like I'm turning a chapter.
You've accomplished a lot for a 30-year-old.
Yes, so I think just that one day everything will be okay. I don't think that the message can be too deep or too detailed, because I don't, like, at that time, like, to a 14-year-old, I don't know what your story is going to be, but I know that with the right resources, the right supports, the right environment, things are going to be okay one day.
Keep it simple. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your hopes and aspirations now as you kind of turn that next chapter, get into the 30s?
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? What are your sort of hopes and next big pictures?
So I have a big dream. My mother and I, obviously having similarities in our life and our struggles, we have a goal to open up or start somehow, however we do it, some kind of crisis, not center, not a shelter, a crisis center for women and children. That's very much focused about feminine attributes. So comfy beds, first of all. I've slept in my car a time or two. And then just like things like gardening, cooking, baking, like bringing out that feminine. And this stems from when I left, like I was very jaded, rough, like I had a cage around me. I didn't enjoy doing girly things because I had to have this persona that I'm tough to get through life. And then I gardened last year, and I have never smiled so much in my life pulling out 33 pounds of potatoes. Like, I was so proud of myself. So just, I think in the world that we've kind of shifted where women are working full time and women are the breadwinners in many families now, and giving them that feminine back. We need it. We need to be soft. It's a part of our it's part of our biology. And so, yeah, just really focusing on that softness and that comfort for women in crisis.
Well, that's certainly an ambitious goal, but one worth pursuing. And, I know just from everything that we've talked about, you're certainly someone who's going to go after it.
Yeah.
So I certainly wish you the best of luck on that. When it comes back to, the more immediate future here within the profession of healthcare, in your role in advocating, what sort of changes do you hope to see in the near future in terms of providing those safer places of psychological safety and physical safety needs within the hospitals?
Just that, I think mental health care needs more safe places that aren't so clinical. I think that's what's really missing from the world right now is that safety piece. The hospital doesn't feel safe. It doesn't to anybody, even if you're a medical patient, right? It's you've got people all around you. There's only curtains between you. Where when we're in a mental health crisis, like our nervous system is looking for safety, comfort, and I think that's my biggest piece is that crisis comfort for people. Yeah, and then just really, I think we all need to sit down and define what is mental health care. Like what from a healthcare perspective, what does that mean?
And that's something that, again, we consistently hear, right? Which is the question around, there's a lot more questions that are needed. And what are those questions before we start jumping in and trying to figure out the solutions? As we've sort of talked today, I've started to understand a little bit more of, again, balancing that desire for the advocacy, but then also to living in the moment and doing the best with what you have. For somebody who might be struggling themselves in the healthcare profession and, haven't put up their hands for support yet, what might you offer in terms of guidance towards that person?
Reach out to your colleagues. I think sometimes we're too scared to tell our colleagues that we're struggling. I think that's a good safe space to start. I encourage all nurses, anyone in healthcare, to seek a counselor, just because, like I said, it's that safe place to talk about everything that's going on in the world of healthcare. Finding your people who you can express yourself to, because when we're holding things in, it's actually worse for us, and it does have that Coke bottle effect where eventually it is going to explode, and then when it explodes, things get worse. So if we catch it while it's still minimal, we'll have better success.
Find your people. I love that.
Yeah.
Again, I think it comes back to that simplicity, but absolutely, this has been a pleasure to have you on the show here, Jenna. There's so much more that we could go into, but we are out of time. So we appreciate you taking a moment here and sharing your insights, your story, and just wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And thanks again for taking the time here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit the links in the show notes for resources and supports from the Care for Caregivers program. If you're interested in sharing your story on the Care2Listen podcast, please reach out to us at careforcaregivers.ca/podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform to be notified when new episodes are released. Thanks again for joining us, and see you next month.